The HOA president flat out screamed that the cabin I legally bought was actually her son's inheritance. What she didn't realize was that I'd already uncovered the original 1873 land grant proving I owned half the valley, while her family had been illegally squatting on it for nearly 50 years. Picture this. I'm cutting away rotted boards from my stunning 150-year-old cabin when a white Mercedes comes screaming up my date road. Out steps Delilah Thornwick, early 50s, blonde highlights, face flush red like a boiled lobster. "Stop! You're destroying Bradley's birthright." I shut off the chainsaw. The silence dropped heavy between us, broken only by her harsh breathing and the clean, sweet smell of freshly cut pine drifting through the air. I bought this place fair and square. Fair and square. She laughed right in my face. Some county auction doesn't erase 100 years of family legacy. Poor Delilah. She had no idea that one forgotten document in the basement was about to cost her everything. What would you do if some entitled Karen tried to steal your property? Drop your location below. I guarantee your town has stories just like this. Let me rewind and explain how I landed in this disaster. My name's Marcus Holloway. I'm 45, and 6 months ago my life completely detonated. A 20-year marriage gone. The suburban dream house sold off to pay divorce attorneys who charge more power than I earned in a day. But here's the strange thing about rock bottom. Sometimes that's exactly where you finally find solid ground. My grandfather, God rest him, always told me, "Marcus, work with your hands and you'll never starve." He taught me carpentry at 12, showed me how to read with grain like it was holy scripture. When he passed, he left me his tools and $37,000 with a note that said, "Build something that matters." So there I was at 2 a.m, scrolling through county auction listings, when I saw her, a breathtaking 1873 log cabin estate on 15 acres in Millbrook Valley, population 847, where old money and shiny new McMansion stare each other down like enemies. The photos showed original chestnut logs and a stone foundation, beautiful but badly neglected. The musty scent of century-old timber hit me the moment I stepped inside for the preview. These weren't just logs. They were hand-hewn beams thick as my waist, fitted with craftsmanship you can't buy anymore. I dragged my calloused fingers across the rough wood and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Auction day was pure chaos. My $47,000 bid beat out some preppy kid in a BMW who kept texting frantically, probably begging his parents for more money. Clean title. Verified paperwork. Done deal. That's when Hurricane Delilah blew into my life. Day 3 of renovations. I'm replacing rotted porch boards when a spotless white Escalade comes crunching up my gravel drive like it already owned the place. Out steps perfection wrapped in designer jeans. Blonde highlights. Perfect nails. That looked like she just stepped in something offensive. "Excuse me," she said, voice coated in honey over shattered glass. "I'm Delilah Thornwick, president of the Millbrook Estates Homeowners Association. My husband, Dean, owns Thornwick Construction. Perhaps you've heard of us." Ah, local royalty. That explained everything. I wiped sawdust off my flannel. "Marcus Holloway, what can I do for you?" Her smile could have cut diamonds. "Well, Marcus, this property has complications. You see, it's always been understood this land was reserved for the Thornwick family. My son Bradley had an arrangement with Mr. Henderson." "What kind of arrangement?" "A gentleman's agreement. Bradley was meant to inherit this property. It's been in our family's sphere of influence for generations." She said our family like she was announcing nobility. I pulled out my deed. According to the county, Henderson died without heirs. That's why it went to auction." Her country club smile evaporated instantly. "That auction was premature," she snapped. "This property belongs with people who understand its importance, people who respect community standards." The way she said community standards while staring at my work boots made my skin crawl. I'd heard that tone before, usually right before someone explained why blue-collar guys didn't belong in management. "Look, I get that you're upset, but I bought this legally. I'm not leaving." She pulled out her phone, tapped quickly. "We'll see," she muttered, stalking back to her SUV. Before climbing in, she turned with a predatory smile. "Mr. Holloway, you clearly don't understand how Millbrook Valley works. We have standards. Learn them quickly. or permits will become very difficult. The Escalade tore off, throwing dust over everything. As the tail lights disappeared, the afternoon carried the distant hum of expensive lawn equipment and the lingering cloud of her overpriced perfume. I should have known then Delilah Thornwick wasn't just angry about losing property. She was declaring war on someone she thought was beneath her. Big mistake. I'd been fighting uphill my entire life. Turns out Delilah wasn't bluffing about permits. Week 2 began with a phone call that turned my coffee bitter. Mr. Holloway, this is Janet from the County Building Department. It appears your renovation permits were misplaced. Misplaced? Like paperwork just sprouts legs and walks off. I drove straight to the county office where Janet, a jittery woman who wouldn't meet my eyes, explained my permits had been accidentally deleted during a routine system update. She handed me a stack of forms thicker than a phone book, still warm from a printer. This will take weeks, I said. I'm sorry, protocol, she replied, glancing toward a back office where shadow moved behind frosted glass. 2 days later, while reorganizing tools and swearing at bureaucracy, a building inspector showed up unannounced. Frank Morrison, early 40s, clipboard, personality of wet cement. We had complaints about unauthorized work. He said, boots grinding into my gravel like a challenge. What unauthorized work? I stopped everything when the county called. He prowled my property like he was hunting violations with a metal detector. The smell of sawdust still hung in the cool morning air, mixed with damp leaves and the diesel exhaust from his truck. Eventually, he scribbled something and handed me a citation. Unauthorized historical structure modifications. Improper waste disposal. He pointed at my burn pile. $2 $300 in fines. Immediate work stoppage. My pulse spiked. That's seasoned timber. I checked the regulations. Anonymous complaint says otherwise. He shrugged and walked away, leaving me standing there like I'd been sucker punched. That's when my grandfather's words came back to me. When someone's cheating, they're usually breaking their own rules too. Time to research. The county archives smelled like dust and forgotten dreams. I spent 3 hours digging through brittle records, fingers stained black with decades-old ink. What I found made me laugh out loud, earning a sharpshooter from the librarian who looked like she'd been cataloging books since the Civil War. My cabin was built in 1873. Millbrook Valley zoning laws weren't established until 1962, nearly a century apart. Divorce paperwork had taught me enough legal language to know this. Mattered, but I needed confirmation. Eleanor Vasquez's law office sat above Bob's Hardware, reached by stairs and announced every step with theatrical creaks. Eleanor was 70-something, sharp as a letter opener, silver hair and eyes that could spot fraud 3 counties away. Grandfathered structure, she said, scanning my documents. Your cabin predates modern zoning by 90 years. They can't regulate something that was legal when it was built. She smiled like a poker player holding aces. I learned this lesson the hard way when developers tried pushing my grandmother off her farm in '78, she said. Pre-existing structures have protections most people never bother researching. What about the fines? We'll fight everyone. But Marcus, this isn't about permits. She dropped a thick file on her desk, rattling her coffee mug. Inside were 8 nearly identical cases. All newcomers. All blue-collar. All harassed until they gave up and left. Each story began with missing permits and spiraled into hell. She's running a protection racket, Eleanor said quietly. Document everything. And don't let her win. I drove home feeling armed for about 5 minutes. Delilah's white Escalade sat at my property line like a predator waiting on wounded prey. She stood there with a professional camera, photographing my work site like a crime scene. Beautiful evening, she called sweetly, just documenting maintenance concerns. I pulled out my phone and started recording. What kind of concerns? Property standards. We take community values very seriously. Click, click, click. Each flash felt like lightning. Wouldn't want undesirable elements affecting property values. That word again. Undesirable. Like I was an invasive species. Mrs. Thornwick, this property isn't under HOA jurisdiction. Her smile stayed fixed, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. Everything in Millbrook Valley affects our community. Marcus. Everything. She climbed into her SUV, rolled down the window, And I'd be careful about that burn pile. The fire department responds quickly to anonymous tips. As she vanished into the dusk, the air filled with smoke, fallen leaves, and her expensive perfume, blending into something that smelled like trouble. This wasn't about permits anymore. This was war. Week 3 escalated into a level of insanity I hadn't seen since my ex-wife tried claiming my grandfather's tools in the divorce. The Millbrook Valley Community Center buzzed with tension Tuesday night. I wasn't invited to the emergency HOA meeting, but Eleanor suggested I crash it anyway. Public meeting. Public property, she'd said with that sharp grin. I slipped in through the back as Delilah set up a PowerPoint. The room smelled like burnt coffee and middle-class anxiety. About 30 residents sat on folding chairs that squealed like tortured mice every time someone shifted. Ladies and gentlemen, Delilah began, clicking to a slide titled Property Value Threats in Our Community. Her voice dripped artificial sweetness. We have an urgent situation. Click. A photo of my cabin appeared, shot at the worst angle possible. Like a meth lab, this project threatens everything we built. Unregulated construction, fire hazards, and frankly, the kind of transient housing that attracts criminal elements. Transient housing. I was restoring history while they lived in cookie-cutter boxes. Click. Another slide. Proposed special assessment. $500 per household to fund legal protection of community standards. The room erupted. Half the crowd nodded along like she'd quoted scripture. Then Mrs. Henderson, an 80-something widow in the front row, raised a trembling hand. Excuse me, Day, wasn't that cabin built by the original settlers? Shouldn't we preserve our real history? Delilah's smile hardened. Mrs. Henderson, we appreciate your vintage perspective, but nostalgia doesn't override modern safety concerns. I'd heard enough. I stood up, and every head snapped toward me like I'd announced I had leprosy. Since you're discussing my property, I said, walking forward through air thick enough to cut, maybe I should clarify a few things. Delilah's face cycled through panic, rage, and disbelief. This is a private HOA meeting. Posted as public notice, I replied, showing the website on my phone. My attorney confirmed my right to attend. That's when Eleanor herself walked in, briefcase in hand, timing so perfect it felt staged. The woman had flair. Good evening, everyone, Eleanor said calmly. It appears there's been some confusion regarding legal jurisdiction. She snapped open her briefcase, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. I've reviewed this HOA's incorporation records. Fascinating material. She held up the original documents. According to these filings, Mr. Holloway's property was never legally included within Millbrook Estates' HOA boundaries. The room fell into absolute silence, broken only by fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like irritated hornets. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, drawing out every word. The previous owner, Mr. Henderson, was illegally charged HOA dues for 17 years. This organization has been collecting fee from someone who was never a legal member. Bradley Thornwick shot to his feet like he'd been shocked with electricity. That's impossible. My family has managed this community for decades. Managed? Eleanor replied pleasantly. Yes. Legally governed? Entirely different matter. I watched Delilah's grand scheme collapse in real time. Her PowerPoint presentation had instantly transformed into documented evidence of harassment, and the realization stamped itself across her face like permanent ink. This is targeted harassment, she snapped, voice trembling like leaves in a full storm. I'll be filing complaints with the State Bar Association. Please do, Eleanor replied smoothly. I'll happily save you time by referencing my 30-year record defending client against exactly this sort of municipal abuse. The meeting dissolved into beautiful chaos. Neighbors argued. Questions flew. Delilah packed up her laptop with the urgency of someone evacuating a burning building. As people filtered out, I overheard whispers that were surprisingly supportive. Bob Kettering stopped beside my chair, the familiar scent of hardware store oil clinging to his woke shirt. Hell of a performance, he said quietly. Been waiting years for someone to stand up to that woman. Count me in if you need community support, added Martha Caldwell, a retired teacher whose eyes sparkled with rebellious delight. Outside in the parking lot, Delilah cornered me near my truck. The October air burned cold in my lungs, her breath puffing out in furious white clouds. You think you're clever, she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family built this community. We know every county, commissioner, every state legislator, every business owner that matters. Must be nice having connections," I said, climbing into my truck. "Too bad none of them can redraw legal property lines." Driving home through the crisp night, victory tasted sweet, mixed with smoke drifting from someone's fireplace. I felt like David after planting a stone right between Goliath's eyes. That feeling lasted exactly 12 hours. Wednesday morning arrived with a melodic roar of heavy machinery at 6 a.m., followed by my water pressure dropping to what I can only describe as elderly garden hose levels. I stumbled outside in work boots and a bathrobe to find a Thornwick construction crew tearing up the main water line along my property boundary. Dean Thornwick stood there in a spotless hard hat, overseeing the operation like he was commanding D-Day instead of fixing a pipe that had worked perfectly fine the day before. "Morning, Marcus," he called cheerfully, the tone of a used car salesman. "Sorry about the early start. Emergency water main repair. You should have normal pressure back by, Friday. Maybe Friday. Just long enough to halt all restoration work for the rest of the week." These people had all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Funny how these emergencies always happen on my property line," I said, watching his crew move with the smooth efficiency of people who'd rehearsed this routine before. Dean shrugged, sunlight glinting off his hard hat. "Old infrastructure. Things break when you least expect it." By noon, I'd lost 3 supplier relationships faster than a politician loses promises after election season. Bob's Hardware stayed loyal, but the lumberyard, electrical supplier, and plumbing distributor all called with versions of the same scripted excuse. "Sorry, Marcus, we're experiencing delivery issues in your area." Delivery issues in a town of 847 people, where you could spit from Main Street to the county line. That afternoon brought my insurance agent, who looked like he'd rather be scheduling a root canal with a rusty hanger. "Marcus, we received anonymous reports regarding safety violations on your property. Fire hazards, structural concerns, environmental issues. What violations exactly?" He scrolled nervously through his tablet, sweat reflecting off the screen. "Open burn piles near structures, unpermitted electrical work, foundation modifications without engineering approval." He sighed. "We'll need to send an inspector. Until then, your coverage is suspended." Suspended. Meaning if my cabin mysteriously caught fire, I'd be on my own. Convenient. That evening, I installed motion-activated security cameras around the property. Basic units from Bob's store. I was testing night vision when my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. "Marcus, this is Police Chief Rita Gonzalez. We need to talk." 30 minutes later, Chief Gonzalez sat at my kitchen table, declining coffee and radiating the discomfort of someone mid-root canal. Mid-40s. Professional. Tired eyes that had seen too much small-town politics. Diesel exhaust from her cruiser clung faintly to her uniform. "I'll be straight with you," she said. "I'm getting pressure to investigate complaints about your property. Noise issues. Environmental concerns. Suspicious activity." "What kind of suspicious activity?" "The reports are intentionally vague. But, Marcus, I've worn this badge for 15 years. I know organized harassment when I see it." She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Document everything. Times, dates, witnesses, and watch your back." After she left, I sat on my porch in cricket-filled darkness, listening to the distant hum of overpriced air conditioning cooling overpriced homes. Honeysuckle drifted on the breeze, mixing with diesel fumes and the sharp edge of my anger. That's when I noticed a slow-moving car. Then again, and again. On the 4th pass, I was ready with my phone. Bradley Thornwick's BMW crawled past at 5 miles an hour, interior light blazing as he photographed my property like a bargain bin private investigator. The kid had the stealth of a marching band. Friday morning brought my water pressure back, along with a business card tucked under my windshield wiper like a passive-aggressive love letter. "Thornwick Construction. We buy properties fast. Cash offers." The audacity made me laugh. I was photographing the card when Bob Kettering's pickup crunched up my drive. He climbed out holding a thermos that smelled like salvation, his face tight with worry. "We need to talk," he said. Inside my kitchen, Bob poured coffee with trembling hands. Dean Thornwick stopped by yesterday. He said quietly, made it clear my business depends on maintaining good community relationships. He looked up, shame and fury mixing in his eyes. He's cutting my supply of credit if I keep helping you. Bob, you don't have to. Like hell I don't. His voice strengthened. 30 years in this town, and I won't be bullied by some trust fund prince and his psycho wife. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. I found something you need to see. Inside were photocopies of building permits spanning 5 years. All Thornwick construction projects. All approved at record speed. Notice anything? Bob asked. Every permit bore the signature of Frank Morrison, the same inspector who cited me for imaginary violations. Same name, same stamp, same rig game. Sweet Jesus, I whispered. They bought the whole system. Saturday morning, I was in the basement wrestling with a sagging floor joist when my crowbar punched through what I thought was solid stone. Instead of resistance, it echoed hollow, the sound that flips your stomach when you find something hidden. Behind the loose stone was a cavity the size of a showbox. Inside sat a leather-wrapped bundle that looked like it had been waiting since Abraham Lincoln's split rails. I carried it upstairs, hands shaking like a first-time skydiver. The leather was cracked but intact, bound with rawhide that felt like history itself. It smelled like old paper, leather oil, and secrets aged for 150 years. Inside were documents that made my knees buckle. The first was an official territorial land grant dated September 15, 1873, signed by the territorial governor, sealed in red wax that somehow survived its stone tomb. The paper was thick, authoritative, unmistakably real. But it was the name that sent me to the floor. Granted to Ezekiel Holloway and his heirs in perpetuity. Holloway, my family. The land description was written in flowery 19th century legal language, but the boundaries were unmistakable. 50 acres. Not the 15 I bought at auction. 50 acres encompassing the valley floor, including Delilah's McMansion kingdom squatting on it like a tick. The second document was a hand-drawn survey map, precise and unmistakably professional. According to it, the Thornwick ancestral home sat dead center on land owned by my great-great-grandfather. Poetic justice. The third document was a letter, faded but readable. Should any man challenge our rightful claim, present these papers. This grant supersedes all lesser claims and cannot be diminished by local ordinance. Ezekiel Holloway had been a paranoid genius. I spread everything across my kitchen table like a general planning a campaign. The implications hit like a freight train loaded with dynamite. The Thornwicks hadn't been squatting for 50 years. They'd been squatting for a century and a half. Every home, every lot sold, every tax collected, all technically on my land. Then my pulse spiked. Mineral rights. The grant included them. I'd heard rumors about gas deposits, maybe even rare earth minerals. If true, this wasn't just property ownership. This was empire-ending money. I called Eleanor with fingers barely steady enough to dial. You need to get here. Now. Bring someone who can authenticate historical documents. What did you find? The nuclear option. An hour later, Eleanor arrived with Dr. Patricia Morse from the State Historical Society. Dr. Morse examined everything with surgical precision. Paper composition, ink aging, wax seal fibers, preliminary assessment. Eleanor asked. Dr. Morse looked up, eyes glowing. These documents appear authentic. If verified, this land grant supersedes all modern claims. Eleanor smiled like a shark. Marcus, you don't own a cabin. You own half of Millbrook Valley. Checkmate. Delilah. Sunday morning turned my kitchen into a war room. Eleanor arrived first. Briefcase expensive enough to hurt feelings. Grin lethal. Dr. Morse followed with an authentication kit that looked like something from James Bond. First priority, Eleanor said, spreading legal pads. Full authentication. Title research. Geological survey. We're not just defending property. We're dismantling a fraudulent development. Bob arrived with coffee strong enough to raise the dead. Martha Caldwell followed with a folder thick as a dictionary. I've been researching your family, Marcus. Ezekiel Holloway was interesting. Civil War veteran, territorial surveyor, and paranoid enough to hide documents properly. She smiled. Also found his survey notes. Want to guess what they say about mineral deposits? The kitchen erupted into controlled chaos. Dr. Moore's photographed documents under specialized lighting. Paper stock matches 1870s government supply. Ink aging is correct. Wax seal is genuine. I remembered something from my divorce. Originals beat copies every time. Eleanor was already calling favors. Patricia, I need land records back to 1870. Yes, it's Sunday, because my client just struck legal oil. While they worked, I called Chief Gonzalez. She answered immediately. Chief, it's Marcus. I needed to report several discoveries that would likely interest your investigation. What kind of discoveries? The kind that finally explained why certain people had been so relentlessly determined to force me off this land. An hour later, Chief Gonzalez sat at her desk reviewing Bob's documentation of permit corruption, her jaw tightening with every page he turned. The steady shuffle of papers was interrupted by increasingly inventive profanity. This is organized, systemic official misconduct, she said at last. Frank Morrison has been accelerating Thornwick developments while deliberately obstructing everyone else. If we can prove coordination, we're looking at federal conspiracy charges. Here's something I picked up back in my corporate years. I said, document everything with timestamps. Patterns win cases. One incident can be dismissed as coincidence. 8 identical harassment campaigns. That's prosecutable conspiracy. By noon, we had assembled a 3-phase battle plan that felt ripped straight from a legal thriller. Eleanor would file a quiet title action to formally establish my complete property boundaries. Dr. Morris would fast-track document authentication through state archives using her academic connections. Chief Gonzalez would initiate an official corruption investigation with federal oversight. But the real stroke of brilliance came from Martha, who'd clearly been plotting while the rest of us strategized. We need media pressure, she said, phone already unlocked. One of my former students, Sarah Chen, works for the regional paper. She's been hunting for a real corruption story. Martha's eyes sparkled with mischievous intelligence. What if we give her an exclusive about a 150-year-old land grant that could collapse an entire development built on stolen land? The afternoon turned into a steady procession of experts arriving at my property. A land surveyor who looked like he'd walked straight out of a movie, complete with weathered hat and boots that had logged serious miles. A geological consultant who collected soil samples while muttering about significant mineral indicators. An environmental attorney who confirmed my territorial water rights overrode any modern municipal restrictions. Each expert delivered the same conclusion. If the documents were authentic, I controlled development rights over most of Millbrook Valley, including subsurface mineral extraction. During our Chinese takeout strategy session that evening, Eleanor laid out the timeline. Phase 1, establish legal ownership through quiet title, 2 weeks maximum. Phase 2, document the harassment pattern and file federal civil rights violations in coordination with Chief Gonzalez's investigation. Phase 3, negotiate from a position of absolute power. What about the Thornwick family? I asked, tasting sweet and sour pork mixed with anticipation. Eleanor's smile could have powered the entire valley. Phase 3 is where we give them a choice. Negotiate reasonable compensation for 150 years of illegal occupation, or explain to a federal judge why they've been running a coordinated conspiracy to violate constitutional property rights. Bob raised his beard toward the ceiling. To David and Goliath. Except this time, I said. David has lawyers, evidence, and mineral rights worth more than Goliath's entire net worth. As everyone headed home, I stood on my porch breathing cool evening air scented with honeysuckle and the lingering aroma of victory planning. Tomorrow, we'd stop playing defense and start crushing the opposition. Monday morning delivered the sweet sound of revenge in motion, followed immediately by Delilah's frantic counterattack that made a toddler's tantrum look refined. I was reviewing survey maps over coffee when the first blast of diesel exhaust announced unwelcome guests. A Thornwick construction crew had returned to my access road, this time with a backhoe that looked capable of relocating the Rocky Mountains. They weren't repairing anything anymore. They were executing full-scale demolition. Road maintenance. Dean Thornwick called out as I approached, his hard hat catching the morning sun like a beacon of premium-grade county contracts. This access road doesn't meet current safety standards. I watched them tear apart gravel that had been perfectly functional since Ulysses S. Grant was president, carving ruts deep enough to hide a Volkswagen. the stench of diesel mixed with freshly churned earth and my rising anger, creating an aroma that screamed economic warfare. Funny timing. I said, phone already recording. Day after I filed legal papers establishing ownership of half the valley. Dean's smile carried all the warmth of a morgue freezer. Pure coincidence. Should be fixed in, a couple weeks. Weather permitting. 2 hours later, my septic system backed up with the enthusiasm of a ruptured dam. The emergency plumber, one of the few contractors not terrified of Thornwick retaliation, found something that made him swear in 3 languages. Someone jammed a pile of rags down your clean-out, he said, pulling out what looked like an entire wardrobe. This was deliberate sabotage. No ambiguity. The repair bill came to $4,000. The message was clear. We can make your life miserable in ways you haven't imagined. That afternoon brought a parade of official harassment that would have impressed Stalin's secret police. A. Reviewed the footage on her tablet. Clear intent. Clear identification. Clear federal jurisdiction. How many charges? I asked. Conspiracy to violate civil rights. Harassment. Stalking. Attempted arson. Animal cruelty. Destruction of property. She smiled. Your local bullies just graduated to federal criminals. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching news footage of Bradley Thornwick being arrested at his mother's house. The perp walk was everything I'd imagined. Handcuffs, flashing lights, Delilah screaming about family connections while her precious son was loaded into a squad car. The local reporter stood in front of the Thornwick mansion, delivering lines that sounded almost poetic. What started as a simple property dispute had now detonated into a full-blown federal investigation tangled with corruption, conspiracy, and attempted arson. My phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. Federal judge approved a restraining order. No Thornwick family member can come within 500 yards of your land. That was it. Checkmate. I lifted my beer toward the night sky, drawing an air that finally smelled like freedom instead of diesel fumes and veiled threats. Tomorrow would deliver the public reckoning I'd been quietly preparing for weeks. Thursday night's emergency town hall packed the Millbrook Valley Community Center like a heavyweight title fight, except the tension was sharper and the crowd was starving for blood. Nearly 300 residents crammed into a hall bill for half that number. Regional news crews lined the walls adjusting cameras, while state officials arrived in black sedans that screamed political panic. The atmosphere buzzed with electricity thick enough to cut and serve with crackers. Sheriff's deputies guarded every entrance after the previous day's arrests. The air carried a cocktail of nervous sweat, burnt industrial coffee, and that metallic ozone smell that always comes before storms, political and otherwise. Delilah sat front and center, looking like she'd aged a decade overnight, flanked by attorneys whose hourly rates could bankrupt small nations. Her usual country club Polish had cracked, revealing something frantic and dangerous underneath. Ladies and gentlemen, County Commissioner Williams announced, a man who looked like he'd rather endure dental surgery without anesthesia. We're here to address recent developments concerning property disputes in our community. Recent developments, like her son being arrested for attempted arson, apparently counted as a minor agenda item. Delilah shot to her feet before he finished. This is a miscarriage of justice, she snapped. My family has been the backbone of this community for generations, and we're being targeted by some drifter who bought stolen land. The crowd murmured like a shaken hornet's nest. I stood from my seat in the back, every eye snapping toward me like stage lights. Stolen land, I said, walking down the center aisle with Eleanor beside me. Between us, our briefcases held enough legal firepower to level a small city. Interesting choice of words. This is completely inappropriate, one of Delilah's lawyers objected. This meeting wasn't convened to relitigate ownership. Judge Patricia Harrison, who had driven down from the state capitol specifically for this circus, adjusted her glasses with the calm authority of someone who'd seen every flavor of legal nonsense imaginable. Given the federal investigation and the criminal charges filed yesterday, I think we should hear what Mr. Holloway has to say. Eleanor opened her briefcase with deliberate precision. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to introduce several historical documents that fundamentally change this discussion. She lifted the authenticated territorial land grant like the Declaration of Independence itself. The room fell silent, broken only by camera shutters clicking like mechanical insects. This, she said, is the original 1873 territorial land grant for 50 acres in Millbrook Valley, issued to Ezekiel Holloway, Mr. Marcus Holloway's great-great-grandfather. It includes mineral, water, and timber rights in perpetuity. The silence was so absolute you could hear dust settling on the windowsills. Dr. Moore stepped forward with her authentication materials. The State Historical Society has verified these documents. Paper composition, ink analysis, seal authentication. Every test confirms this is a legitimate territorial-era land grant. That's impossible, Delilah whispered, but in the dead silence her words landed like confession. Eleanor smiled, the expression of a prosecutor delivering a knockout blow. According to this grant, the Thornwick family has been illegally occupying Mr. Holloway's ancestral land for over a century. Every home in your development, every parcel sold, every tax dollar collected, sits on land that legally belongs to the Holloway family. The room exploded. Residents shouted. Reporters surged forward, and Delilah's lawyers whispered frantically, damage control plans about 50 years too late. And there's more. Eleanor continued over the chaos. Geological surveys commissioned by Mr. Holloway indicate substantial mineral deposits, natural gas, and potentially rare earth elements. We're discussing projected value in the tens of millions. That's when Delilah lost all control. This is fraud, she screamed, pointing at me like I'd insulted her ancestors personally. He's a con artist, a criminal. My family built this town. State environmental inspector checking for chemical contamination. A fire department safety officer investigating structural hazards. A county health official documenting sanitation concerns. Even some unfortunate soul from the agriculture department checking for unpermitted livestock operations. I didn't own any livestock, unless you counted a raccoon family that had adopted my trash cans. Each inspector arrived with suspiciously identical timing, vague anonymous complaints, and barely concealed disappointment when they found nothing wrong. The scrape of clipboards against citation forms became the soundtrack of bureaucratic persecution. This is military-level coordination, Eleanor said when I called after Inspector Number 6 left empty-handed. They're carpet-bombing you with regulatory harassment, hoping something sticks or hoping you crack. Wrong target. I've been watching you operate, Marcus, she added. You're the kind of stubborn that gets historical monuments built. That evening, while I grilled a burger and pretended my life wasn't under siege, I spotted movement in my tree line. Security cameras don't lie, and mine showed 3 figures in dark clothing moving through my woods like discount ninjas on their first stealth lesson. I grabbed my brightest flashlight and walked toward them, making enough noise to alert half the county. Evening, folks. Beautiful night for felony trespassing, isn't it? The sound of bodies crashing through underbrush was like a bear having a nervous breakdown. I found their abandoned supplies. Spray paint cans, what looked like sugar men for my gas tank, and a professional camera with a telephoto lens that probably cost more than my truck. But desperation truly revealed itself in what they left behind. Bradley Thornwick's wallet, driver's license, credit cards, and a membership card to some country club I couldn't pronounce. Amateur hour, I said to the darkness, pocketing evidence that would make Chief Gonzalez very happy. Tuesday delivered the bribery attempt I'd been anticipating like Christmas morning. Dean Thornwick arrived dressed in his Sunday best, carrying a briefcase that promised serious money. Marcus, let's be reasonable men, he said, settling into my kitchen chair like we were discussing last night's game. You've made your point. You're a fighter. We respect that. He opened the briefcase with theatrical flair, revealing more cash than I'd seen since my divorce settlement. Neatly stacked hundreds that smelled like desperation soaked in old leather and broken dreams. 200,000 cash, he said. Walk away quietly. Keep your dignity. Start fresh somewhere that appreciates your talents. I stared at the money. Enough for a nice house, a new truck, maybe a vacation that didn't involve lawyers. For exactly 10 seconds, it was tempting. Then I remembered the 8 families they'd driven out before me. Generous offer, I said calmly. What makes you think this property is worth that kind of money? His smile flickered like a dying neon sign. Just trying to avoid unnecessary conflict. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Dean, if this cabin and 15 acres are only worth $4,000 to $7,000 at auction, why are you offering $200,000 to make me disappear? The color drained from his face like someone pulled a plug. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm asking directly. You know about the territorial land grant and mineral rights, don't you? Dean snapped the briefcase shut like a coffin lid. You're making a catastrophic mistake. Holloway, my family has connections at every level of government. We can make your life very complicated. Funny thing about threats, I said, walking him to the door. They sound a lot less scary when you're recording them for federal investigators. As his truck vanished down my deliberately destroyed road, I stood breathing evening air that tasted like victory seasoned with danger. Phase 2 was about to get beautifully messy. Wednesday brought psychological warfare that would have made Sun Tzu take notes. I woke to find dead animals scattered across my front porch like a twisted offering. 3 rabbits, a possum, and what looked disturbingly like someone's pet cat, arranged with theatrical precision that screamed complete unhinged desperation. The smell hit before the sight, death mixed with morning dew and the lingering scent of whoever handled the bodies. My coffee tasted like ash and regret, but bullies always overplay their hand. They'd left tire tracks in my soft garden soil, clear as fingerprints. The tread pattern matched Bradley's BMW perfectly, because apparently criminal masterminds don't understand evidence preservation. I called Chief Gonzalez before touching anything. Chief, it's Marcus. I need you to see something that's going to make your day very interesting. 20 minutes later, she stood on my porch with a camera and an expression capable of melting steel. Jesus Christ, Marcus. They've escalated to animal cruelty and psychological terrorism. Gets better, I said. Check the tire tracks. She photographed everything with methodical precision. This pushes us into felony territory. Harassment, intimidation, conspiracy. How long before we move? I asked. Soon. The FBI field office is very interested. Small-town corruption mixed with civil rights violations, that's their specialty. That afternoon, my ex-wife called. I hadn't heard from Jennifer in 6 months, not since the divorce papers were signed and she'd moved to Phoenix with a yoga instructor boyfriend. Marcus, I got a very strange phone call. She said, panic barely contained. Some woman named Delilah claimed you're involved in illegal activity. She wants to reopen our divorce proceedings. Said you were mentally unstable. My blood pressure spiked. She contacted you directly. She called my office, spoke to my secretary, mentioned where I live. Marcus, I'm scared. The implications hit like a sledgehammer. They were targeting my ex-wife 3 states away. This had crossed into interstate stalking, federal crime territory. Document everything. I told her. Times, dates, exact wording. Call Phoenix police. What the hell did you get yourself into? I bought a cabin and restored it, I said. Apparently that's a capital offense in Millbrook Valley. After she hung up, my kitchen felt less like a home and more like a target. Dust motes danced in afternoon sunlight like my scattered thoughts. That evening brought the escalation I should have anticipated. I was grilling dinner when I smelled gasoline carried on the breeze. My security feed showed a figure in dark clothing creeping around my workshop with a gas can and rags. Arson. They were going to burn me out. I called 911, grabbed my brightest flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. I can see you. Fire department's already on the way. The figure bolted, dropping the gas can, but not before motion-activated cameras captured everything. Even under a cap and dark clothes, I recognized that entitled Awkward Gait. Bradley Thornwick was having the worst week of his privileged life. The volunteer fire department arrived first, followed by Chief Gonzalez and 2 state investigators who looked straight out of a crime drama. Floodlights, yellow tape, the whole cinematic package. Attempted arson, Chief Gonzalez said, examining the gas can, and those fingerprints are going to ruin someone's day. Detective Sarah Mills.